Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into the strangely well-recorded yet wildly misinterpreted daily existence of Roman prostitutes. But before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of content. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time is over there. It's always amazing to see the global crew come together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's slowly sink into tonight's journey. You come to not quite wake up in a room barely big enough to sneeze without bruising your elbow. Congrats! You live in a cellar, the Roman equivalent of a remote job. If home means a glorified broom closet and job requires body oil, then you're right where you belong. These rooms were standard issue for many of Rome's working girls. Found in brothels or lupanars, sometimes above rowdy taverns or humid bathhouses. They were cramped, airless holes doubling as home and office. Imagine a studio apartment built by someone who hates sunshine, airflow, and solitude. Your mattress? Stuffed with straw, sometimes shared with fleas, and carries a faint aroma of wine, ash, and regret. If you're lucky, there's a small oil lamp. If you're really lucky, it hasn't gone missing. Your worldly goods, cheap face powder, a comb, maybe a bronze mirror of fortune smiling, sit in a corner as weary as you are. No plumbing, no water, just a bucket. Best not to dwell on that. Bathing? That'll be later in the public bathhouse, where both water and awkward glances are shared equally. But there's no time to linger. Your room is your workspace, and business hours are whenever someone yells, barges in, or pounds on the door. Privacy? Not a Roman virtue. Walls are more suggestion than boundary, and doors are mostly decorative. You start the day by sweeping out the remains of last night, dust, spilled wine, and the occasional forgotten sandal. Then comes a ritual, powder, rouge, and enough perfume to qualify as a fire hazard. You're not aiming to smell good, just better than the guy next to you. You rehearse a practiced half-smile in the dull bronze mirror, not because it works, but because pretending helps. Once, a client called you charmingly alert, and you've been clinging to that compliment ever since. In this basement life, mornings begin the same, tight, hurried, and just polished enough to limp to lunchtime. After waking up in what amounts to a closet, it's time to get ready for another day of seduction and surviving judgment. But first, cleanliness, or the Roman version of it. There's no bathroom, of course. That a luxury for the rich, and even theirs is just a glorified bucket. As a working woman in a city that praises marble statues, but tolerates open sewers, your best bet is the nearest fountain or bathhouse, depending on your tolerance for naked small talk. If time's short, and it usually is, you go for a splash at the communal fountain. A quick rinse, a swish of wine as mouthwash if you're feeling fancy, and pray the water wasn't just used to rinse off poultry. No soap, but maybe you have some natron, a salty powder that scrubs your skin and your dignity. If business has been good, and your coin pouch is jiggling, you treat yourself to the public baths, the great Roman equalizer. Everyone goes, traders, soldiers, philosophers, and that one guy who won't shut up about his hemorrhoids. You strip, stash your clothes in a cubby you trust far too easily, and slide into water filled with steam, gossip, and someone else's toenail. Inside, you sweat out, scrape yourself clean with a curved blade called a strigil, and enjoy 5 glorious minutes of being the cleanest person on your block. Then you towel off, reapply perfume, and wonder, not for first time, why no one's invented deodorant yet. They haven't. To top it all off, chalky face powder, rouge for your lips and cheeks, and coal smudge around your eyes. Not to be beautiful, but to mask the exhaustion. Clients don't want to see the woman who's already serviced 3 senators and a sailor. They want mystery, allure, and someone who doesn't smell like reheated lentils. Now that you're washed, or at least theatrically perfumed. It's time to get dressed. And while Roman society had a complicated relationship with fashion, one outfit made your role obvious: the female toga. Yes, toga, that flowing white cloth we associate with emperors, senators, and frat brothers. But here's the twist. Here's the twist. In Rome, when a woman wore a toga, she wasn't making a bold political statement. She was making a professional one. It was a walking billboard that screamed, "I'm not a respectable matron, and yes, I'm open for business." Proper Roman women wore the stola, a layered dress that quietly whispered, "My husband manages my dowry, and I'm in bed by 9. Prostitutes, by contrast, were banned from wearing the stola and legally required to don a toga, often short, brightly colored, and designed for maximum visibility. Think less divine goddess, more neon sign you could spot from the next street over. Accessories were part of the pitch. Cheap jewelry, bronze or colored glass beads, and earrings loud enough to rattle in a breeze. The aim wasn't grace. It was attention. When 20 other women are within shouting distance, subtle fashion choices don't pay rent. Footwear was simple sandals or nothing at all, depending on coin and cobblestone tolerance. Comfort didn't make the list of job perks. You'd spend the day standing, pacing, or bolting from a creepy client or self-righteous senator with a moral stick up his toga. Hair was another performance. Prostitutes curled and dyed their hair, sometimes wearing wigs, especially blonde ones from Gaul. Blonde locks were the Roman version of a luxury import, like perfume, only more animated. And then came the cosmetics. Pale face powder contrasts with red lips and cheeks, and thick black kohl to dramatize the eyes, or at least disguise a chronic sleep loss. Fully prepped. You looked anything but subtle, and that was entirely the point. In a metropolis of a million people, your outfit was your pitch deck. If you looked bold, controversial, and potentially available, mission accomplished. So now you're styled, scented, and hopefully not still tipsy from last night. On to the real work. Getting customers in a city that craved sex but blushed at its existence. Marketing in ancient Rome didn't do nuance. No pamphlets. No websites. No consultants in tunics with clipboards. If you wanted work, you had to be visible, vocal, or immortalized in some bathroom scrawl. Ideally all three. Let's start with turf. If you worked in a lupanar, a dedicated brothel, your office was already positioned for foot traffic. These places clustered near bathhouses, markets, and taverns. Basically anywhere someone might be hot, bored, and willing. You'd stand in the entrance, wearing your boldest look-at-me ensemble, calling out to people passing by with flirty lines, urgent deals, and limited-time offers. 2 denarii if you're fast. Desperate? Maybe. But the next girl just dropped her rate to 1. If you were freelance, it was all about mobility. You might linger near temples, because nothing tempts like the sacred, or flirt near taverns with drunk legionaries full of coin and questionable choices. But the crown jewel of ancient marketing? Wall graffiti. Yes, Pompeii preserved the brilliance of Roman ad copy. Brothel walls bore handwritten reviews like, "Maritimus gave me the night of my life," or "Felicia, 2 denarii, very fast service." This wasn't vandalism. It was Yelp Roman style. Raw, loud, and carved in stone. Some women paid to have their name and talents scratched into columns or door frames. Others let customers do the writing, with results ranging from glowing praise to poetic complaints about lost wallets. One thing was clear: success depended on exposure. If nobody knew your name, your rate, or what you were known for, you weren't working. Just like today, talent didn't always win. Sometimes better PR did. So now you've announced yourself. The toga's on, your eyeliner's fighting gravity, and your confidence is strong enough to pretend you're in a good mood. Time to talk pricing. The moment when Rome acts like a capitalist playground, while still judging you for playing. Let's be blunt. No union, no minimum wage, just market rates, guesswork, and whatever you could lock in before someone offered crust of bread in trade. For lower-tier brothels or street workers, rates could be as low as 1 or 2 asses. A coin so small it wouldn't buy you lunch. That's right. Some men paid less than a bowl of stew. Depressed? Don't be. Some women took food, shoes, or vague promises as payment. Even in a money-rich empire, IOUs roamed freely. Meanwhile, high-end workers, called meretresses, operated like luxury boutiques. They took silver denarii, sometimes multiple per client, especially if they offered more than sex. Conversation, music, poetry, basic reading skills. Anything to make clients feel like they were buying culture, not lust. Some women had niches. No, not architectural ones. Personal brands. Maybe you specialize in sailors, seductive dance, or pillow-side poetry. Don't laugh. Ovid inspired someone, surely. The more unique your service, the less replaceable you were. Regulars might earn discounts. Or not. That depended on whether they paid promptly or smelled like spoiled turnips. And if you worked under a pimp or a brothel owner, expect a massive chunk of your earnings to vanish before you touched a single coin. Some women were enslaved. For them, there was no coin at all, just food, a shared mattress, and a vague hope that someday they'd buy their freedom, assuming Rome handed them a miracle. Welcome to the Lupanar. Not glamorous, but hey, it had walls, which already makes it slightly more respectable than working behind a tavern. Technically, it's a place of business. Realistically, it's a humid stone labyrinth of questionable life decisions. The word Lupanar comes from lupa, meaning she-wolf, Roman slang for prostitute. That's right, your profession doubled as an animal metaphor. Not exactly inspiring, but hey, at least they were consistent. Most Lupanars were cramped 2-story buildings wedged between bathhouses and bars. Perfect real estate for intercepting half-drunk senators and aimless sailors. Inside, there's a tight hallway lined with closet-sized rooms, each containing a stone slab, a threadbare mattress, and just enough square footage to rethink your entire career path. No doors, just curtains for that ancient Roman open-concept experience. Privacy? That's a luxury for patrician wives. You get moist linens and the constant soundtrack of someone snoring one curtain over. You're not working solo, of course. A respectable Lupanar employed multiple women, plus one charming leech called a Leno, pimp, or Lena, madam. Their job: skim your pay, promise maintenance that never comes, and occasionally bark things like, pick up the pace. He's got a villa. The clientele? Everyone from blushing teens to swampy-smelling soldiers and receding hairline senators insisting they came for philosophy. Some finish faster than a drop coin. Others try to recite their poetry, which, honestly, is worse. During slow hours, you perch near the entrance, perfecting the look of seductive yet spiritually vacant, while calling out to potential customers. Marketing here is volume-driven. 2 coins. Limited time offer, I'll act like I care. And yes, the walls are absolutely covered in graffiti. Rome's version of Yelp, lovingly scratched into plaster. Things like Felix came twice or Ty's nose or stuff. Sometimes, someone gets artistic and draws pictures. The anatomy may be optimistic, but the enthusiasm is undeniable. Working at a Lupanar isn't glamorous, but it's reliable. You've got a roof, technically, and a bed if you lower your standards. Most importantly, you get front row seats to the weirdest procession of humanity Rome has to offer. But not every Roman prostitute worked in a Lupanar. Some were assigned or opted for the dazzling world of taverns. If brothels were like chaotic cubicles, taverns were open-plan startups with more vomit and fewer benefits. Taverns, called Pony or Papini, were ground zero for drunkards, traveling salesmen, off-duty legionaries, and men named Gaius with dice debt and loud opinions on Virgil. For working girls stationed here, the daily motto was clear: serve the wine, sell the charm, and avoid unwanted groping. A normal shift meant filling grimy cups with diluted wine for men too buzzed to notice, while simultaneously flirting just enough to keep the coins coming. But not so much that a fight broke out. Unless, of course, the fight was funny. Then, let it play out. Unlike brothels, taverns were technically food establishments, so your daily backdrop included the scent of boiled cabbage, fish sauce, and fermented body funk. It's a perfume that clings to both your tunic and your will to live. But on the bright side, it gave you upsell opportunities. 2 extra coins, and I'll pretend you don't reek a garum. Some women worked the back rooms, or upstairs rooms, turning the tavern into a part-time brothel with drink service. Others kept it looser, offering companionship, some strategic lap perching, and seductive compliments like, "Nice clean toga." In Rome, that was practically poetry. Payment was expected on the spot. Credit was a fantasy. If someone tried to delay, your options were simple: yell, threaten, or fetch the bouncer, usually a one-eyed ex-gladiator with a scar and no patience. The upside? Taverns brought heavier foot traffic and occasionally better tips. The downside? You were part waitress, part emotional sponge, part emergency negotiator, and nobody tipped for trauma support. Then there was a nonstop background noise: shouting, clacking dice, terrible lyre solos, and men loudly misquoting Cicero to impress girls. Tavern shifts were chaotic, exhausting, and reeked of stale ambition, but they paid, assuming someone didn't puke on your sandal first. For the enterprising spirit with zero brothel ties and a bold attitude, there was always the street. Freelance sex work in Rome meant walking the razor's edge between independent contractor and please don't arrest me. The streets buzzed with potential and sewage. Outdoor workers were called prostibuli, drifting between alleys, bathhouse doors, markets, and even temple steps. Because nothing says divine connection like a limited-time offer outside the shrine of Venus. Daytime business had perks, steady traffic, but came with risks. You faced gawkers, petty officials, and furious wives convinced you were corrupting their husbands. You weren't. Their husbands needed no help. You dressed to be seen. Short tunics, loud jewelry, maybe a wig made of imported German hair. Less graceful nobility, more spot me from the Colosseum. The trick was to get a man's attention before his spouse, or guilt did. Making a pitch meant blending flirtation, instinct, and not being mistaken for a runaway slave. You'd smile, admire his sandals, and whisper your rate, preferably before the vigiles, street guards, decided you were an eyesore with legs. Clients came in all types, some courteous, some aggressively stingy, and a few just baffled and genuinely looking for the bathhouse. You learned to tell who was who fast, based on eye contact, urgency, and how their purse jingled. The competition? Ruthless. You weren't just vying with fellow prostibuli. You contended with free-spirited flirts, hammered partygoers, and aging gladiators selling charm and biceps on the side. Everyone wanted a slice of that denarius. No safety nets. No benefits. Just your charm, sharp instincts, and the ability to hustle in flimsy sandals. Some women carried knives. Others depended on the tavern's bouncer backup. A few just hoped tonight's clients weren't sad poets in denial about commitment. Yet for all its madness, street work had perks. You chose your hours, kept your money, and didn't have a Leno breathing down your toga. Sure, there were surprise goats, yelling philosophers, and the occasional grabby statue impersonator, but at least you answered to no one. In a city where bosses were rarely the heroes that mattered, think this life sounds tough? Now meet your least favorite regular, the Roman tax collector. Because yes, welcome to the empire. Ingenious builders, rulers of the Mediterranean, toga connoisseurs, they also managed to invent a special tax just for prostitutes. It was called the vectigal excapturus, and ensured that even your least romantic encounters helped fund Roman plumbing. Congrats. Your late-night labor just bought someone a new public toilet. This wasn't some unofficial scam either. It was a fully legalized system enforced by collectors called publicani, men who radiated bureaucratic menace and sandal-polished condescension. They tracked everything, insisted on cash, and probably judged your hairstyle while scratching figures into their wax tablets. To operate legally, you had to register with the aediles, city officials with a fondness for scrolls and judging people. Once registered, your name was added to an official list of prostitutes. Basically like joining a guild, except no perks, and instead of an ID card, you might get branded. Literally. Enslaved sex workers were often tattooed, or burned with labels like Lupa or their owner's name. If you're wondering whether clients found that awkward, don't worry. The branding wasn't for them. It was there to make sure you could never pretend to be respectable again. The tax rate? That depended. Where you worked, who your clients were, senators with sorrow in their eyes or thrifty gladiators with coins tucked in their sandals. You paid per visit or per week. Depending on the region, there were no deductions for awkward silences, emotional exhaustion, or soul-crushing regret. Failure to pay might mean a fine, arrest, or getting barred from plying your trade altogether. Still, enforcement was uneven, especially if you slipped coins under the table or could flirt effectively with an aedile. But for a profession already steeped in shame, the tax felt like salt in the wound. Rome basically said, your job disgusts us. Also, we'll take 10%. Still, bright side, you could proudly declare your work helped finance another temple. Maybe even one to a goddess who never once answered your prayers. Being a sex worker in Rome meant you had legal permission to exist, and unlimited social permission to be insulted. It was tolerated, taxed, and documented. But that never stopped senators, priests, or philosophers from condemning you, often while adjusting their own tunics. Enter Rome's unofficial moral patrol, not a squad with batons, but a network of disapproving senators, sanctimonious priests, judgmental matrons, and frustrated poets. At the hypocrite summits to the Roman Senate, a circle of aging aristocrats determined to preserve Roman virtue, usually defined as whatever we're not caught doing. They publicly decried moral decay while quietly racking up tabs at every brothel from the Palatine to the port districts. Then came the aediles, actual city officials tasked with maintaining hygiene, order, and decency. They inspected brothels, fined women for dressing too obviously, and upheld laws requiring prostitutes to be easily identifiable, which made blending absolutely illegal. Writers like Juvenal and Seneca delighted in roasting sex workers, lumping them together with greedy traders, loud wives, and terrifying intellectual women who, heaven forbid, read books. Yet these same authors included vivid, oddly accurate brothel descriptions, as if they were quoting their own field notes. Respectable Roman matrons, wives of elite men, added their own flavored disdain. They never spoke to you, of course, but they passed your street corner with glares sharp enough to peel a pomegranate. Some even campaigned to stop prostitutes from wearing jewelry or using public baths. Ironic, considering their husbands treated the baths like networking lounges with extra nudity. All of this judgment came on top of the usual job hazards, disease, injury, and whatever mystery condition that sailor from Brundisium brought in last Saturnalia. Welcome to the ancient wellness chapter, where survival was less about health and more about divine indifference. Let's begin with the crowd favorite, venereal disease. Rome didn't know what bacteria were, but they didn't know some men left behind more than bad breath and bad poetry. Surviving texts describe everything from persistent itching to body parts detaching like overripe fruit. Treatment? A cocktail of vinegar rinses, herbal mush, and desperate invocations to Venus. patrons saying of bad choices. Pregnancy was another occupational hazard. With no pills, shots, or planned anything, options range from desperate to downright creative. Prostitutes turned to natural contraceptives like silphium, an extinct plant so overused for birth control it vanished from the planet. There were also animal intestines, pressed into duty as makeshift condoms, and wool tampons soaked in herbs. Their effectiveness? Somewhere between divine miracle and oops. If pregnancy happened, outcomes varied. Some women kept their babies, raising them in brothels. Others abandoned them to foundling homes, or simply the street. Infanticide wasn't strictly legal, but public apathy made it practically civic policy. Daily maladies, aches, cuts, stress blackouts were treated with wine, opium, or scolding from your leaner to toughen up. Still not cured? Time to crawl into a temple of Asclepius. Crash on the floor and pray for a dream that healed more than your hangover. Roman wellness was less spa day and more hallucinogenic slumber party with gods. Infections? Rampant. Hygiene was a fantasy. There were no gloves, no sterilization, and definitely no hand washing before exploring bodily geography. And mental health? Depression, trauma, and anxiety were part of the service. Rome didn't offer therapy, just co-workers with wine, and the occasional stray cat who listened without judgment. In a city where divine wrath explained everything from famine to flatulence, prostitutes weren't just dodging human shame. They were bribing gods for health, luck, and fewer foot lickers. Religion was a full-time hustle, and the divine pantheon? Always watching, always judging, sometimes cursing. But a few gods were notably more sympathetic to the profession. Start with Venus, goddess of beauty, love, and delightfully bad life decisions. Many women kept tiny shrines to her in their rooms, offering flowers, perfumes, or a coin, hoping for charm, coin, or clients who didn't reek of damp wool and goat stew. Then there was Fortuna, goddess of luck. When your nightly wage could swing between a gold trinket and a promise wrapped in mildew, Fortuna became your unofficial patron. A whispered prayer or a charm at her face might be your only insurance before a client with suspiciously clean sandals walked in with a grin. Of course, not all religious practice sparkled. Rome was steeped in superstition, curses, and mystical hacks. When something went wrong, it wasn't your hygiene, it was the spirits. You burned incense to block the evil eye, tied red cords on your ankle, or hired a witch to hex your rival's hairline. No joke. Archaeologists found cursed tablets in brothel districts, reading like ancient one-star reviews. May her tongue decay. May her clients vanish. May she trip and land in manure. If you were enslaved, you might pray to Mercury, god of commerce and transactions, because honestly, your life was one unending business receipt. And if you managed to squirrel away enough to buy freedom, Libertas, goddess of liberty, got her own altar and a pricier candle. All of this divine networking wasn't just ritual, it was stylish survival. When Rome gave you disease, judgment, and whiny senators, the gods were your HR department, mostly ineffective, occasionally helpful, and always accepting bribes. Love? Complicated. In this profession, love was either a passing illusion or a liability wearing sandals. Clients declared love all the time, usually after too much wine and a tragic rant about their mothers. Some were sincere, others tipsy, and a few were angling for a discount. But baby, I'm different, they'd whisper, grabbing your hand with theatrical flair. You'd smile, nod, and silently calculate their unpaid tab. Some women genuinely returned the affection, or pretended convincingly. Emotional performance was part of the job. Smile, listen, and pretend his toga made him interesting. Not every client smelled like despair. With a few, something real could bloom, affection, attachment, or just shared exhaustion. But more often, Love was a hazardous detour, especially once you remembered your legal status. Rome labeled you infamous, meaning you couldn't marry a citizen, even if someone foolishly proposed. That never stopped people from trying. Stories abound of working women who fell in love with their regulars, who were promised gardens, freedom, marriage, only to be left behind the moment a younger woman with better lashes walked by. Still, some clients truly adore their chosen companion. They bring gifts, compose terrible poems, and in rare cases, even grant manumission, freedom from slavery. But those were the outliers, not the blueprint. Real connection was more often found among your peers. You worked side by side, absorbed the same slurs, shared lice and lunch. Some friendships grew into unspoken partnerships, others into quiet, hidden romances. The patriarchy insisted women could only love men with daggers and family names, but reality was always more creative. And of course, there were the comforting lies, that you'd leave one day, that your best client truly meant it, that you'd save enough to open a perfume stall in Ostia and never have to fake a moan again. Maybe none of it was true, but in Rome, everyone had a dream. Yours just wore cheaper sandals and didn't expect to survive long. In Rome's sex economy, beauty was coin and youth the exchange rate. But what happened when the glow faded? The client stopped looking, and your knees clicked louder than your earrings. You didn't vanish. You adapted. Some women, either through savings or a wealthy client who kept his promise, bought their freedom and started over. The luckiest opened taverns or bathhouses, renting rooms to the next batch of optimists. Others became leanest, madams, the brothel's version of upper management, less performance, more bookkeeping and yelling. As a Lena, youth was optional, but menace was mandatory. You needed sharp eyes, a sharper tongue, and the ability to make threats involving sandals sound credible. You ran the numbers, scheduled the workers, and ensured the curtains were tolerable. Clients feared you. Workers obeyed. Sometimes, the aediles, Rome's morality cops, sighed every time you darkened their doorway. Other retired workers leaned into fortune-telling. After years of listening to secrets and watching patterns, predicting doom was practically instinct. A few became unofficial counselors, doling out herbal advice and sarcastic wisdom, laced with questionable remedies. But many just kept working. Rome didn't do pensions, especially not for women in togas with too many stories. Some aged workers still had regulars. The pitch just shifted. Less bashful blossom, more seasoned confidant who could endure bad poetry and pretend to care. Appearance still mattered, but reputation did, too. A woman known for clever conversation or soul-stirring astrology might stay in demand long after her prime. For those without clients, savings, or luck, the choices narrowed. You begged. You swept temples. You worked until your hands resembled dried figs. Rome didn't care how you aged, only that you did it quietly. But here's the truth. They didn't get statues. For many, survival itself was the achievement. If you made it to old age with your wits, your stories, and at least one decent sandal, you were already a legend. When we think of Rome, we imagine marble gods, emperors with ego issues, and perfectly chiseled torsos. Rarely do we picture the woman leaning in a brothel doorway, adjusting a wig, calculating how many coins she needed to not starve next week. Roman prostitutes didn't just live in the shadows. They were exiled there by historians who preferred aqueducts to awkward questions. Yet they're everywhere. In graffiti, in lawsuits, in poetry, in legal loopholes. Even on receipts. Yes, actual receipts. They were essential to daily life, even as society pretended they were morally contagious wallpaper. History usually gets it wrong. It paints these women as helpless victims or manipulative vixens. But in reality, many were resilient, shrewd, and better businesswomen than half the Senate. They knew how to read people, set boundaries, dodge danger, and sell survival in a city that threw roses at gladiators and rocks at women wearing the wrong shoes. And they weren't monolithic. Some were enslaved, some free. Some catered to senators, others to men who paid with moldy olives. Some hated every moment. Others carved out routines, reputations, and tiny freedoms. Most lived somewhere in between, like everyone else in Rome, pretending they weren't exhausted. Their words were rarely preserved. Their stories, remembered secondhand, through satirical poets, moral panickers, and modern archaeologists squinting at Pompey's raciest scrawls. But somehow they remain, in scratched names on stone, in sarcasm etched into walls, in rules bent around their existence. These women were erased from official memory, but not from the record. They laughed, they schemed, they wept, they endured. No tombs, no marble, just faint ink and fading echoes. Maritima was here, and worth every coin. So next time someone waxes lyrical about Roman grandeur, remember, behind every philosopher in a starched toga stood a working girl who kept both the gossip and the empire running. Yarrow was no ordinary weed in Viking lands. It was believed to carry sacred energy. Its healing gifts whispered to come from Odin himself. Preparing remedies with it wasn't just practical, it was ceremonial. A healer might cleanse a wound with boiled water steeped in antiseptic herbs, then apply crushed yarrow to staunch the bleeding, binding it with linen or animal hide. During treatment, sacred chants or soft prayers were sometimes spoken, calls to the gods of protection, strength, or mercy. Healing in this world was as much a spiritual offering as it was a bodily repair. Yarrow wasn't limited to battlefield wounds. Its flowers and leaves, steeped into a tea, soothed fevers, eased troubled digestion, and relieved menstrual cramps. It was versatile, plentiful, and found along river banks and in family garden plots tended by women who were both caretakers and scholars of their earth. Viking healers possessed a keen knowledge of their landscape. They knew which herbs bloomed in which season, how to harvest them without angering the spirits, and how to preserve their strength through the long, dark winters. This knowledge passed through generations, mother to daughter, elder to apprentice, woven with Germanic plant lore and Norse cosmology. In a world without antibiotics or hospitals, healers and their plants were not just useful, they were essential. They carried the strength of tradition, myth, and practical survival. While yarrow handled bleeding, infection required stronger allies. Angelica was one such powerhouse. Angelica archangelica, a tall, fragrant herb with hollow stalks and pale blossoms, thrived in the northern cold. It was so revered. It continued to be cultivated in monastic gardens well into the Christian era. Viking medicine prized Angelica for its broad healing power. Roots, leaves, and seeds were all put to use. Most often, the dried root was boiled into strong brews to treat internal infections. It warmed the body, improved blood flow, and reduced swelling, vital qualities for a people who lived half the year in snow and shadows. Its antiseptic strength was especially valuable for infected wounds, the kind ignored too long or fouled by grit and rot. A healer might grind Angelica's root into a powder, blend it with animal fat or beeswax, and smooth it over festering injuries. Taken internally as a tea or tincture, Angelica fought fevers, lung sickness, and digestive distress, ailments that could quickly turn deadly without modern medicine. But like many herbs in Viking belief, Angelica did more than heal flesh. It held symbolic power. Though its Latin name points to angels and Christian lore, the Vikings too believed certain plants were divine gifts. With its piercing scent and dramatic form, Angelica was seen as protective, sacred, something more than botanical. Women healers use it in women's health as well, helping regulate menstrual cycles and ease childbirth, a moment as revered as it was feared. In smoky rituals, Angelica might be burned to cleanse sick houses or drive out pestilence. Across farms and coastal villages, it was indispensable, medicine and magic in a single stem. It stood at the heart of Viking survival. As snow melted and spring crept back into the north, another healing treasure emerged: birch sap. The birch tree, familiar and sacred, offered far more than firewood. For Viking healers, it was a living source of medicine. At the start of spring, when the sap rose from the roots to feed fresh leaves, it was tapped, harvested by hand during a short window of awakening. This clear, subtly sweet liquid was given as a tonic to those weakened by fever, malnutrition, or the exhaustion of surviving another winter. It could be drunk fresh or left to ferment into a lightly alcoholic drink that revitalized the spirit and body alike. Without the benefit of nutritional science, Viking healers still understood its power. Rich in minerals and sugars, birch sap replenished the drained and restored energy in the sick. Often, birch sap was paired with cooling herbs like elderflower or meadowsweet to reduce fevers gently. In more severe cases, it was mixed with bitter plants such as wormwood, believed to purge the body of harmful humors. The principle was simple: cleanse, nourish, restore balance. Healing was a form of restoration, inward and outward. Externally, the birch also proved its worth. The bark, when boiled, released a dark, tar-like substance with antiseptic strength, useful for burns, skin infections, and bites. Birch leaves, too, found use in steamy infusions and ritual baths, meant to draw toxins from the body while aligning soul and flesh through sacred practice. Symbolically, the birch embodied rebirth and cleansing. It was often the first tree to regrow after the land was scorched or cleared, and its sap represented that renewal, a pure, living fluid that gave hope and strength. In every healer's mind, birch sap marked more than a season. It marked survival. Then came juniper, the warrior's purifier, hardy and aromatic. It flourished in the rugged soil of Scandinavia. Its sharp needles and strong scented berries were essential tools in the healer's craft. Whether burned in sacred spaces, steeped into brews, or crushed into poultices, juniper was used to purify the body, the air, and the spirit alike. The berries acted as a diuretic, treating kidney issues and urinary infections. Brewed into a tea, they increased urine flow and helped the body rid itself of harmful buildup. In a time when water carried as many risks as rewards, this was no small gift. Juniper smoke was also used to cleanse spaces during plague or illness. Its scent was sharp, protective, and spiritually cleansing. The idea wasn't just to treat disease, it was to cast it out. Juniper's power was both practical and sacred. It was medicine, yes, but also shield, ward, and invocation. Soothe more stubborn cases. For Viking healers, such combinations were not random, but drawn from centuries of oral knowledge and trial. The careful pairing of herbs like meadow and mint reflected an understanding of balance in the body, echoing broader Norse concept of harmony and the interconnectedness of all things. Beyond its physical uses, meadow, with its sweet scent and delicate flowers, was often associated with tranquility and rebirth. In ritual settings, garlands of the plant might be laid across beds of the sick or woven into wreaths for the newly recovered. This wasn't merely decoration. It symbolized the return of health and the closing of a cycle, from illness to healing, from imbalance to renewal. Such practices revealed how Viking medicine blurred the line between the physical and the spiritual, making recovery as much about restoring inner peace as it was about curing a symptom. In a world where pain was common and suffering often came without warning, meadow offered a rare comfort. Whether steeped in a steaming cup, crushed into a poultice, or left by a bedside as a fragrant guardian, it held a quiet but vital role in the healer's arsenal. Gentle but effective, humble but powerful, this meadow-born herb reminded Viking communities that even in the harshest of climates, nature had its mercies, was sometimes worn as a charm or tied above a doorway to repel dark forces and ensure safe passage through liminal times, birth, death, and seasonal thresholds. Its distinctive scent was thought to purify not only the air but the spirit, aligning the individual with the rhythms of nature and the favor of the gods. In healing rituals, mugwort served both as a medicine and a medium. Crushed leaves might be rubbed on the skin to relieve muscle tension, or placed in satchels hung near the sickbed to ward off unseen maladies. The dual use, practical and mystical, reflected the Viking belief that health was not simply the absence of illness, but a harmony between the body, the soul, and the world beyond. Tools available to Viking practitioners was garlic, or allium sativum. For Viking women, especially those tasked with the health of their communities, mugwort was a lifeline. Its ability to ease pain, bring on dreams, and calm the spirit made it an irreplaceable part of the healer's apothecary. Passed down through generations, the knowledge of how and when to use mugwort marked the difference between suffering and solace, between chaos and clarity. To the Viking mind, a plant like mugwort was never just a plant. It was a living link to their ancestors, their gods, and the hidden laws that govern the cosmos. Whether brewed in a bitter tea or burned to send the night air, mugwort offered protection, insight, and peace. In its smoke and its silence, it whispered the ancient promise that healing was always possible, for the body, for the mind, and for the soul. Though it didn't originate in Scandinavia, garlic was already circulating through European trade networks. The Vikings may have acquired it through early interactions with Britain, Francia, or trading routes from the east. Its distinct smell and remarkable healing power earned it a permanent place in Norse healing practices, especially for combating infections, expelling parasites, and shielding the body from disease. Even without modern science, its antibacterial and antifungal abilities were deeply respected. Viking healers often applied mashed garlic in poultices to sterilize wounds and stop rot from setting in, especially valuable for treating cuts suffered in battle or on the road. When used on injuries, garlic could destroy dangerous microbes and calm inflamed tissue. It burned fiercely, but it worked. And in an age when even a scrape could prove fatal, effectiveness mattered more than comfort. Garlic also played a role inside the body. Vikings consumed it raw, ground into paste, or steeped in potent teas. It was believed to enhance the body's defenses, cleanse the blood, and stoke internal heat during sickness. Through brutal Nordic winters, when sickness was rampant and fresh food was rare, garlic was a trusted elixir. It was sometimes blended with honey, another natural antiseptic, to soften the taste and increase its effect. Garlic was also a go-to remedy for internal parasites, especially the worms common in unhygienic settings and around farm animals. A sharp blend of garlic and vinegar was dosed carefully to flush the system. Its intense nature made it both a physical purifier and a symbol of strength in Norse medicinal lore. Garlic's power wasn't limited to health. Many Vikings believed it also fended off dark spirits and invisible threats. Braided bulbs were often hung in doorways or above sleeping places, not just to deter illness, but to shield inhabitants from metaphysical harm, especially during vulnerable times like childbirth, plague, or war. Garlic was seen as both treatment and talisman. Before launching expeditions, some Viking warriors even ate garlic as part of their preparations, believing it gave them inner fire and resilience. In this sense, garlic represented not just healing, but protection, guarding health, bolstering the weak, and grounding the self amid the chaos of an unpredictable world. Nettle, or Urtica dioica, was another potent ally in Viking herbalism. Far from being merely a stinging nuisance, nettle was prized for both its curative and practical properties. It flourished around fields, forest borders, and homesteads, making it a common but invaluable plant. Its tough nature and ability to thrive in challenging environments reflected the Viking spirit of grit and endurance. Healers mainly used nettle to treat blood disorders and issues related to physical vitality. Teas and soups made from its leaves helped combat tiredness, anemia, and general frailty. Its richness in iron, calcium, and vitamin C made it a natural supplement, especially vital during long cold seasons when nutrition dropped and sickness flourished. Healing rituals often incorporated plants seen as spiritual thresholds, and mugwort was chief among them. Its pungent aroma and powerful presence made it more than a herb. It was a bridge, used in moments when body and soul hovered in states of flux. For Viking healers, mugwort wasn't just medicine. It was a sacred partner, standing between the tangible and the mystical. It guided the ailing not just toward bodily repair, but back into harmony with divine forces and the world around them. Among the most versatile and revered healing, recovering warriors and feverish children were often given nettle to regain lost strength. The leaves, once dried or boiled to tame their sting, were steeped to make medicinal drinks. These concoctions were thought to purify the blood, stimulate circulation, and encourage the body's own cleansing processes. Nettle's gentle diuretic effect also made it helpful for reducing swelling or fluid buildup, problems common among those who worked with their hands or aged into stiff joints. Nettle had external applications, too, some of which might surprise modern readers. One such method was urtication, where fresh nettles were whipped against aching limbs to revive numb or painful areas. Though it caused short-term pain, it was believed to generate warmth and bring energy to lifeless tissue. Passed down through oral tradition, this method reflected deep faith in nettle's life-giving properties. Beyond medicine, nettle had a wide range of household uses. Its fibers were durable and could be spun into ropes, fishing lines, or woven into cloth, especially useful in times when other materials like wool or flax were unavailable. Its dual role as both healer and raw material made nettle a cornerstone of Norse practicality. Nourishing the body and sustaining daily life, nettle became deeply embedded in Viking culture. Symbolically, it stood for resilience, thriving in disturbed earth, returning each year despite repeated cutting. In a society where survival demanded both toughness and flexibility, nettle captured that spirit. For Viking healers, it served as a reminder that pain could yield healing, and that power often hid in things first perceived as harmful. Viking medical practice was largely oral, passed down in songs, gestures, and memory. There were no written texts during the Viking Age. Knowledge lived in the voices of mothers, the hands of wise women, and the rituals of healers. It was shaped by nature and belief, and treating illness meant restoring harmony between body, spirit, home, and the divine. Viking healers relied on the gifts of the land. They knew the rhythm of the seasons, which plants to gather in spring, which roots to cure and store before winter's grip. Yarrow, angelica, birch, juniper, meadowsweet, mugwort, garlic, nettle. Each herb held a purpose within a system that linked health with nature's order. Remedies addressed physical symptoms, but also symbolized spiritual balance. Sickness could represent a disruption in fate or a breach in the boundary between the visible and unseen worlds. Women played a central role in this tradition. On farms and in longhouses, female healers cared for kin and village alike. Some became volar, seers who merged medicine with prophecy, conducting sacred rites and invoking gods like Frigg, Air, or Freya. Healing was more than duty. It was a sacred link between mortal and myth. As Christianity spread and Norse paganism declined, this oral tradition faded. Some practices were absorbed into monasteries. Others branded superstition or lost to time. Yet echoes remain in Scandinavian folk medicine and renewed interest in ancestral plant wisdom. The Viking healer's legacy lies not just in herbs, but in their worldview, that nature holds sacred power, that healing is both body and soul, and that the land speaks to those who listen. Joan of Arc was born in the winter of 1412 in Domremy, a quiet village in northeastern France near Burgundy. France at the time was fractured by the 100 Years' War. Joan was born into this chaos. Her parents, Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romee, were devout peasants who raised her in the Catholic faith. Their life was humble, built on farming and prayer. Joan couldn't read or write, like most peasant girls, but she was devout from a young age. She helped with chores, tended sheep, and spent hours in church. Her homeland, though loyal to the French crown, bordered lands held by Burgundians allied with the English. Violence was constant. Joan grew up hearing tales of saints, heroes, and burning villages. Yet she remained beloved by neighbors, known for her piety and quiet seriousness. Her favorite chapel honored the Virgin Mary. There, she said, her divine calling began. At 13, Joan claimed to hear voices in her father's garden, a vision surrounded by light. Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret appeared. Their message: she was chosen by God to save France, drive out the English, and see Charles crowned king. At first, Joan told no one. She feared disbelief, but the visions grew stronger. She fasted, prayed, and embraced spiritual discipline. In 1428, as the English besieged Orleans and the Dauphin remained uncrowned, Joan felt called to act. She went to Vaucouleurs and asked to speak with the local commander, Robert de Baudricourt. He dismissed her, but she returned, her resolve and reputation growing. After she accurately predicted a French loss before the news reached town, Baudricourt relented. Disguised as a man and escorted by soldiers, Joan set out to meet the Dauphin. By early 1429, Joan arrived in Chinon where Charles held court. The journey was dangerous, 300 miles through enemy land. When she finally stood before Charles, he tested her, disguising himself among courtiers. She immediately identified him and reportedly spoke secrets only he knew. Impressed but cautious, Charles sent her to Poitiers for examination by church scholars. Despite her youth and lack of education, Joan answered their questions with calm and conviction. She was declared sound of mind and faith. Her virginity, tied to her divine role, was confirmed. The court allowed her to join the army bound for Orleans. Joan asked for a banner, white, with Christ and the words, Jesus Maria. She valued it more than her sword. She also received white armor and a sword she claimed to have found behind an altar by divine guidance. At just 17, Joan prepared to lift the siege of Orleans. By spring 1429, Orleans had been under siege for months. Its fall threatened all of France. Morale was crumbling. Joan entered the city on April 29th, greeted as a miracle. Dressed in white and mounted on a white horse, she became a symbol of divine hope. Though untrained, she urged aggressive action, claiming her voices promised victory. Her courage rallied troops. She fought beside them, was wounded in the shoulder by an arrow, and returned to battle after dressing the wound. On May 8th, the English lifted the siege. It was a stunning victory. For the first time in years, France had hope. Joan had delivered the first part of her divine mission. She then turned to the second, the coronation of Charles at Rheims, the sacred site for French kings. But it lay deep in enemy territory. Joan's conviction swayed the hesitant Charles. Along the Loire, they won battles and towns surrendered. By July 1429, they began the coronation journey. Her fame spread. Cities yielded without a fight. On July 16th, they reached Rheims. The next day, in its grand cathedral, Charles was crowned. Joan stood beside him, banner in hand. The prophecy was fulfilled. But court politics returned. Some questioned Joan's influence. She, however, set her sights on Paris. Joan viewed Paris not just as a city, but as a divine objective. Still under enemy control, it represented unfinished work. Charles hesitated. Seeking diplomacy, Joan urged action. She believed delay risked everything. Thus continued her mission, driven not by ambition, but unshakable faith. One of the most versatile herbs in the Viking healer's arsenal was yarrow, or Achillea millefolium. Known across Europe for its ability to staunch bleeding, Yarrow was used to treat everything from battlefield wounds to internal ailments. Viking warriors might carry it with them, tucked in pouches or sewn into garments, ready to be applied in emergency situations. Crushed into a poultice and pressed into a wound, yarrow could slow bleeding and promote clotting, a life-saving function in an age without surgical tools. It was also brewed into teas to treat digestive issues, fevers, and pain. Its slightly bitter taste was considered purifying. Yarrow's use was not limited to the battlefield or the sickbed. Healers believed it could help bring balance to the humors, elements thought to govern the body's health, and realign a person's energy with the natural world. In some traditions, yarrow was used in love and divination rituals. Its white flowers were seen as a sign of clarity. Its feathery leaves a symbol of inner vision. For the Viking, who viewed health as a state of spiritual and physical harmony, yarrow was a plant that worked on multiple levels. Another key healing plant was juniper, a small evergreen shrub with powerful berries and aromatic wood. Juniper was widely used for cleansing of both spaces and bodies. Viking healers burned juniper branches in sick rooms, believing the smoke could drive out disease and purify the air. Juniper smoke was also used in ritual, especially in ceremonies of the dead or during seasonal transitions, where spiritual boundaries were thinnest. The berries, strong and resinous, were brewed into teas or used in tinctures to treat respiratory problems and muscle aches. Juniper was also considered protective. Sprigs were hung in homes to keep illness at bay, and some warriors carried small pieces of juniper wood for luck and safety in battle. The scent itself, sharp and invigorating, was thought to clear the mind and strengthen the heart. Healers saw juniper as a plant of thresholds, used during moments of danger, death, or transformation, like mugwort and garlic. Juniper connected the body and the spirit, grounding the weak and protecting the vulnerable. Together, these plants, yarrow, juniper, mugwort, garlic, and nettle, formed the foundation of Viking healing. They were more than medicine. They were symbols of survival, strength, and the sacred balance between humanity and the forces of nature. For laborers, peasants, and beggars, maslin or black bread was the norm, a dense, coarse loaf made from whatever grains were available, often rye, barley, oats, or legumes like peas and beans. In lean times, bakers might stretch the dough with chestnut flour or ground beans, resulting in a bitter but filling staple. Bread reflected one's place in society. In monasteries, the type of bread varied by religious order. Some monks ate simple, austere loaves, while wealthier monasteries served guests white, high-quality bread. Bread also served social functions. At feasts, lords used trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread, as plates. Afterward, these would be given to servants or the poor. Charity, too, was often dispensed in the form of bread at monastery gates or noble estates. Skilled bakers had to navigate these class divides, producing a range of loaves daily to serve an entire town. Bread was more than food. It was a symbol of economy, status, and identity. Being a medieval baker required not only skill, but compliance with strict laws. Bread was so vital that local authorities and trade guilds tightly regulated its production. Breaking the rules could mean humiliation, loss of trade, or imprisonment. Guilds governed quality, training, pricing, and supply. Standards for weight, size, and ingredients were enforced through regular inspections. Bakers typically apprenticed for years before earning the right to run their own ovens. Guild membership offered protection and market access, but came with obligations. Violations like underweight loaves could result in fines, suspension, or expulsion. Municipal authorities also monitored bakers. In England, for instance, a law dating to the 13th century dictated how much bread should be sold for a fixed price, adjusting with grain costs. Inspectors called bread weirs conducted surprise visits. Penalties were often public and shaming. Pillories, public parades with faulty loaves hung around a baker's neck, or even exile. Such enforcement wasn't just about fairness. It was about survival. Bread riots, fueled by famine or inflation, posed real threats. Bakers had to meet precise standards because, in the eyes of the guild and the town, baking was a public duty. Running a medieval bakehouse was physically demanding and hazardous. Fires had to reach high temperatures to bake dense loaves, requiring large quantities of wood and often flammable structures. Ovens, large, domed, and made from clay or brick, were built for thermal retention. To bake, a fire was lit inside the oven until walls were hot. Then the embers were raked out and the hearth cleaned. But even a small spark could ignite a town. Thus, bakehouses were often located on the town's edge or built from fire-resistant materials. Health risks were severe: lung damage from smoke, physical strain from kneading dough and lifting sacks, and frequent burns from oven work. Some cities used communal ovens to save fuel and reduce fire hazards, but this created risks of theft or mix-ups. Bakers bore responsibility for every household's bread. A single disruption, fire, illness, or injury, could affect an entire community. While the guild system emphasized male bakers, women played a vital role in bread making. In rural areas, women typically handled baking at home, using communal ovens or hearths. They often sold surplus loaves for income. In cities, widows frequently took over their husbands' bakeries and sometimes became successful proprietors. Though guilds were male-dominated, women in parts of Germany and France could inherit licenses, run businesses, and train apprentices. Women performed the same demanding labor: mixing dough, hauling ingredients, tending ovens, and selling in markets. They were bread sellers, often the public face of bakeries. Yet they earned less, received little credit, and were more vulnerable to accusations. Despite these challenges, women's work was essential, especially during wars or plagues. Baking intersected with care. Mothers passed down techniques as tradition. In every tier of society, women shaped culture and sustenance through bread. In medieval Europe, bread was sacred. The church, one of the largest consumers and producers of bread, infused it with spiritual meaning. The Eucharist, the transformation of bread into Christ's body, required specific unleavened white wheat hosts, baked under strict conditions. Designated monks performed this ritual labor in silence and reverence. Bread production in monasteries extended far beyond this rite. Monasteries, major landholders, and food producers operated large bakehouses for monks, workers, and guests. Bread formed the bulk of the daily diet, often paired with cheese or ale. Monasteries distributed alms bread to the poor, while churches accepted loaf donations from patrons. Special altars displayed and blessed bread, which was given to mourners or the needy. Churches also regulated bread in some towns, handling disputes and enforcing fair trade. On feast days, ornate loaves were shaped into crosses or doves to mark liturgical celebrations and community bonds. Bread wasn't just nourishment, it was spiritual sustenance. For bakers, supplying the church meant participating in the divine economy, where bread carried sacred significance and the oven became a vessel of ritual as much as routine. Bread and power were intimately linked. Control over its price and availability meant control over people. Bread accounted for most of the average person's diet, and its supply dictated stability. Governments imposed price controls, often fixing loaf costs while requiring bakers to adjust size according to grain prices. This strained bakers during scarcity, forcing smaller loaves and reduced profits. Any deception, selling underweight bread or hoarding flour, was seen as treasonous. Punishments included fines, pillories, public shaming, or bans. Bakers had to keep detailed records, and inspections could occur at any time. In times of war or famine, they might be placed under guard. Bread riots were feared. Scarcity or high costs could incite mobs to loot bakeries and destroy records. Officials sometimes seized grain or subsidized bread to calm unrest. Bread served as both tool and symbol of charity and control. Rulers distributed it to win public favor. Lords fed retainers to ensure loyalty. Affordable bread marked effective governance. Thus, bread was both sustenance and statecraft, and the bakers stood at the crossroads of hunger and authority. Though their names rarely survive, medieval bakers shaped everyday life. In a world of kings and castles, it was a humble baker who kept towns fed. Working before dawn, their labor affected every household. Bread marked life's milestones, baptisms, weddings, funerals, and feast days. Baking knowledge passed down through families or apprenticeships preserved tradition. Bakers learned by feel, not measurement, judging dough texture, oven heat, and stretching flour in lean times. Regional differences emerged. Some favored rye or barley, others imported wheat. As cities grew, baking evolved from household task to commercial trade. Innovations in milling and transportation improved flour access, but the rhythm of baking, rise, knead, fire, feed, remained unchanged. Today, remnants of this legacy endure. The word companion comes from Latin companes, with bread. Guilds paved the way for modern food regulations. Communal ovens inspired neighborhood bakeries. The medieval baker's impact lies not only in the loaves they made, but in the communities they nourished. Through flour, fire, and faith, they fed more than mouths. They sustained society.